tell them what you're doing and tell them why you need to get paid what you need to get paid. You don't, you know, it's a much better argument, in my opinion, to let them know that I need this much money. Profit is not a four-letter word. It's actually six. It's something that we should all be very proud of and willing to defend. If you can't defend your profit or the amount you need over the actual cost, you should be able to and we're going to step into this, know your numbers as well. You should know what your overhead expenses are. How much, you know, clearly you probably know what you pay in rent. You should know what your phones are. You should know what the employees you pay. You should be able to take that information, all of that, all of your gross expenses, and drill that down into what is it. You know, if I did 100 jobs last year and it cost me $100,000 in overhead expenses that weren't direct costs like material and labor, then I know that, you know, for each job I'm spending $1,000, right? So I should be able to tell an insurer that as well. Look, each job costs me $1,000 in overhead expenses for phones, for my, you know, the person answering the phones and the person answering the phones, and my rent, my insurances, whatever. All of those things, you should be able to have that discussion with them, and that's where knowing your numbers becomes such a big deal. And being able to present all that to an insurer and let them know that is showing that you have these costs, and that's why you need additional profit compared to what they're allowing. This, in that same vein, knowing your numbers, so you should know what your actual costs are. But the other part is knowing what you need. Then, if you're at $1,000 a job in labor and overhead expenses, then you should be able to calculate what your margin needs to be. If it's if it's going to cost you $10,000 and you got $1,000 in expenses on each job, that's $11,000. You should have a pretty damn good idea of what your margin needs to be, and it's not 10 and 10. That works out to a 16% gross margin. If you just take the 10 and 10 on top of your actual cost, and it's 16%, you're not even going to be able to. You're not going to be in business long. That's the problem with that whole myth about O&P being enough to cover it. It's not enough to cover what a contractor needs. Most contractors I know, if they're, you know, 10% of their gross revenue is going to go into sales costs alone. They're probably going to have something in the range of 10 to 15, maybe even a little higher in overhead expenses, rent, non-production employees, you know, whoever's answering the phones, who's ever doing the books, runners, so on and so forth, not to mention your truck expenses, all the insurances that go into that. So just off the top, most contractors I know, again, are going to be north of 20%, maybe even close to 30% in their actual 30% gross revenue that they're going to have to put back out in expenses. They don't even start making any profit at all until they get north of 30%. And that's maybe doesn't include paying yourself. If you're the owner, you need to get paid too. So that has to factor into all that along the way. And that's the important thing about knowing your numbers, your gross and net margin. At the end of the year, after you've paid everybody and you've paid all your material bills and you've paid all your labor is paid off and all your insurances are taken care of and up to date, and you've paid yourself, you deserve to get paid. What you do is really hard, and there's so many moving parts. You deserve to get paid too. What is that amount? You know, after you figure all that, there's still got to be something left. No company is sustainable if they're just making if you need $1 million to pay all those things and you get $1.1 million, then you've got nothing left if the next year is not, if you have a really off year, how are you going to keep the employees you've got? How are you going to keep the rent that you've incurred? You know, those trucks with the wraps that you've got out there, you're paying insurance and all that. How do you maintain all that if you've got nothing put away and you're not making enough to cover those things as well? And that's where your net margin, after everything's said and done, everything's paid, you need something left over, you know, whether it be, and this is something you have to figure out, what are you comfortable with? But, you know, in my opinion, you should be somewhere in that 10, 12% is an ideal scenario. If you have 10 or 12% left net after you paid everything, that gives you and your costs are cost with overhead and everything is including paying yourself is something close to 35%, then you need a 45% at least gross margin. And if you're not getting that, then you're really not making money and not really being a sustainable company. And I think too many contractors are not aware of where their numbers really are. And it's really, really important that you understand where your numbers are, where they come from, how the insurers are arriving at the numbers they think you should be at, and at where you can, where you can make hay in showing them what the numbers should be and why those numbers should be.